Today's guest is Gemma Sisia, who's the founder and CEO of St. Jude's School in Tanzania. And she has a remarkable life story. Growing up on a large farm in country New South Wales near Armidale, she had 7 brothers, 2 parents and herself, and they were primarily the workforce for that very large farm. She learns lessons of resourcefulness, persistence and grit, as you need to do when you are on a farm. She has really embedded a culture of care and respect in the school and talks about how that happens. She's had some great ideas for seeking the input of valuable stakeholders like parents to have a continual improvement culture and mindset. It's an amazing story, and I know you'll learn a lot. Enjoy. It's a real pleasure to welcome Gemma Sisia, who is the founder of the St. Jude's School in Tanzania. Welcome, Gemma.
Hi, Graham. Thanks for having me.
Gemma, what does care in the workplace mean to you?
Well, given that we are a school, care is very important. And in actual fact, we have signs in various places in our school with our core values, because care for us, our core values is respect, responsibility, honesty, and kindness. So in regards to caring, you show caring by being respectful, by being honest, by being responsible. And so through our core values, if our staff, students, parents, and our visitors and our supporters follow our 4 core values, which is respect, responsibility, honesty, and kindness, then it's a caring environment.
Yeah, I love how you integrate the values like that. And that's what makes it really come alive, I think. When everyone honors those values and lives those values, it just creates a special culture. It really does.
Yes. So you'll find that you probably can't even walk for 20 meters before you see a sign hanging up somewhere with our 4 core values. Because in the end, you could be first in physics or accounting class, but you're not a nice person or a nice student. So those core values, we actually evaluate our students. So on the school report, you have the academic side and, the extracurricular assessments, but there's also a core values assessment.
You have an amazing story, and I think our listeners would be very interested to know. And as I understand, you grew up in a very large farm in country New South Wales. You had 7 brothers and parents that really instilled a work ethic with you. And you've now founded this extraordinary school. Would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit of background about that journey? And I guess, first of all, how you came to be in Tanzania and what made you think, well, let's do a school?
So it really kind of started back in the late 80s, early 90s. So when I was at university, it was around 92, 93. I was studying science. And at the time, I was probably thinking about becoming a teacher because, yes, I grew up on a farm, sheep, fine wool merino with 7 wonderful but very wild brothers. I think that taught me a lot of survival skills pretty much from birth. But when I was at university, I was thinking about becoming a teacher because I was probably going to marry a farmer's wife, and a lot of farmers' wives are casual teachers or nurses. So I thought about doing teaching. But anyway, I met a lady in Melbourne because I went to Melbourne University, and she told me she was looking for science teachers and maths teachers, and I'm math science high school. And so I said I'd help her. So I went across to East Africa. This is the mid-90s, and that's where I started teaching. Now, to give you an idea of mid-90s, there was no internet. It was the peak of the Lonely Guide books, the Lonely Planet guidebooks. And the way I would communicate with my family was either by post or telegram. But then in the last year that I was working in East Africa as a teacher, the fax machine came. And so I was able to go into the village post office because they got a fax machine, and I could fax my dad's office in Armidale. And that's how I was able to communicate. But anyway, growing up with 7 brothers, we were very aware of what mum and dad did for our education. My mum would buy herself a dress once in a blue moon because school fees was very important. And to put our kids through private schooling in Australia is not easy, Graham, as you can
Mhm.
imagine, especially if you're farmers.
Yep.
Then, when I was in East Africa after finishing uni, it was the peak of the AIDS crisis. It was before all the medicine came in. We've got wonderful medicine nowadays that's completely free and very accessible here in Tanzania. But at those years, there was no medicine. And so a lot of the students were having to leave the school where I was working, not because they were passing away, but their parents were. So maybe dad passes
Wow.
away. Mum wasn't educated, couldn't raise the money for the school fees, so the child would have to leave the school. So me being my, young self, and when you're young, you think you know everything, you're infallible, but you're actually having no idea what you're talking about. Huh. Hey, who needs business plans? Nobody needs business plans. Just go for it. So I thought, wouldn't it be great to build a good quality private school that didn't charge school fees? So parents like my parents wouldn't have to struggle to find the school fees. And children, if they lost their parents, they wouldn't have to leave the school. And
Mm.
so that was where I got the idea of building the school St. Jude. Now, even today, now we're 20 years on, 20 years later, even today, around 4 of our students lose a parent every month. About
Wow.
4 of our kids lose a parent every month, but they never have to leave the school because 100% of our students are on full scholarships. So,
Yeah.
anyway, so I went back to Australia after working for a few years and here in Africa. Went back to Australia and told all my brothers and my mum and dad that I'm going to build a free private school in Africa. And you can imagine how that went down. But one of my good friends in Armidale, her name is Agnes. We grew up together. She gave me my first donation. And thankfully, she never asked me for a business plan or anything like that. And she just said, go for it, Gem. So my first donation from Agnes was $10. So I took it to the Commonwealth Bank, which in those days was in the mall in Armidale, and opened a bank account. And then I started talking at schools and clubs and basically anyone who would be willing to speak with or hear me. And then we raised enough money to build the first classrooms of the school with the help of Rotary. Rotary in Armidale actually helped me to build my first classrooms. And then I opened the school in 2002
Mm.
with 3 students. A huge number of enrollment. And so we went from 3 students in my first day of opening. We just didn't give up, and we've been fundraising ever since and enrolling new students. So today we've gone from 3 students to 3 schools. So we've got
Mate.
one primary school, 2 secondary schools. The secondary schools are both boarding. So we'd have around probably 1,500 students in boarding.
Mhm.
And then we have about 330 Tanzanian staff. And then we also have a tertiary program. So we support around 400 students across 10 countries with their university.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a background.
Yeah. The scale is extraordinary now. And, I guess you just did have to, build one student at a time, one teacher at a time, one building at a time.
Exactly. Uh-huh.
And getting support. My father was a Rotarian. I know they do lots of great things around the
Mm,
world, and my father's club did a lot of work in New Guinea, building a
yes.
school up there. So it is wonderful that they can help, almost like seed fund, isn't it, getting things off the ground. The size and the scope of the school now, is extraordinary. So what would be your operating budget each year now?
We're a little bit less than 8 million US this year.
Wow. Wow.
Mm.
So we're talking 12 million Australians, somewhere in that vicinity.
And you'll be very proud to know that around 92% of our income, so we are 100% donor funded, 100% of our students are on full scholarships, and 330 Tanzanian families, and you can imagine all the suppliers for that budget, all
Yeah.
the families that, and suppliers in town, the hardware and transport, our buses, we've got over 30 buses with 1,500 kids in boarding. You can imagine how much they eat. And in secondary, especially those boys. And so our food budget is huge. So you can imagine the amount of farmers that rely on our annual budget. Anyway, 92% comes from Australians. 92%. Very proud. Very
That's
humbled.
that's
Mm,
very, very, wonderful, wonderful news.
mm,
You mentioned before about, having your signs of your values around the school. How do you also, I guess, build that sense of purpose with, first of all, the teachers and the staff and also the students? How do you, embed that on a daily basis?
So I have the most wonderful management team behind me, which I've been able to build over the many years. I have a management team of 10 people behind me. So whilst I'm speaking with you, actually the pressure is behind me. So I've got a wonderful finance manager. Then I have a manager overseeing all the schools, the academic side. Then I have another manager overseeing all the tertiary and the gap year, and another one who's fundraising, another one who's doing HR, another one who's dealing with our parents, because over 90% of our parents of our students don't have a secondary education. So there's that whole welfare and health, because to get a scholarship, the family also has to be very poor. So in regards to staff, our staff have KPIs, they're on contracts. We have to abide by labour laws, so we have disciplinary hearings. There is child protection rules in the school. We operate on a very professional basis. So if a staff member doesn't do their duty or work well or hit their KPIs, they're given warnings, but eventually we won't renew their contract.
Yeah.
With our students, because 100% of them are on full scholarships, from the day that they arrive at the school and every year afterwards, the student and their guardian sign an agreement of expectations. And that agreement is signed every year. So because Graham, if you're not willing to appreciate, one of my first sponsors, Graham, was one of my mates from boarding school. She was from Cootamundra. And she sponsored one of my first students, not because she actually thought that the school was going to get off the ground, but she was young like myself and wanted to just help me out. But she worked really hard to raise the money for her sponsorship of a student here. So in return, I want the student here who gets that scholarship to appreciate the gift that they have been given. And so we have a contract basically with each student and their family of behavior, of academic, of all types of, behavior with the student that we expect in return for that scholarship. So that's how we manage and work on the standards of our school. So whilst we are a school based here in the third world, we like to operate it very professionally, and we expect our students to appreciate their scholarships so that they can perform and achieve the goals that they want to. So to give you some stats, I think it's 97% of our year 12s going to university.
Wow.
And so they are really making impact now here on the ground, which is wonderful.
You shared just before we started that you had a broken arm and had to go to hospital. Do you mind just sharing that for our listeners, please?
Yep. So long story, not a really long story, but about 10 years ago, one of our donors from Melbourne visited the school and he gave me this little green ceramic turtle, a very random gift. Now I've become a bit of a turtle lover. But at that time, I didn't really, it was a bit of a random gift. Anyway, he said to me, his name's Andrew, he said, Gemma, I'm giving you this turtle because when turtles have babies, you don't see them. Like the babies scurry down to the ocean and nobody sees them for a number of years. And that's when they're just trying to avoid being eaten. They're living in the reeds. They're just trying to avoid the predators. But after a number of years, they turn up on the beach and they continue the cycle. And he said, you wait, once your students finish their degree or their trade or whatever they're going to do, you're also not going to see them for a number of years. Don't get despondent. But after a few years, maybe 10 years or so, you'll start seeing them pop up as CEOs, as business leaders. And so our first year group finished university or started to come out of university in 2019. So our first year 12 group had 60 kids in it. Thankfully, there were more than 3 of them. By the time they got to year 12, there were 60 of them. Most of the group did 3-year courses like business, marketing, education. Then some of them did engineering. They came out in 2020. And then 10 of the 60 came out as doctors in 2021. But basically, they all started coming out of university around 2019, 2020. So I'm thinking, of Andrew's turtle analogy. I've just got to keep the faith till probably about 2030, because our kids, once they finish university, they're just trying to get a job, trying to find money to put 3 meals on the plate a day, trying to find money for rent. So I've just got to keep the dream and keep the grind, Graham, until about 2030. And hopefully by 2030, I will have discovered whether this whole thing has been a waste of time or been worth it. But just in the last year or so, all of a sudden, I'm starting to run into turtles on a professional basis. Now we're getting back to my broken arm. So just to give you some, some turtle stories, they're already coming back to the beach, and we're much, much earlier than I had expected. So, for example, my mother-in-law had issues breathing. She's an asthmatic. And so my husband and I had to rush her to a hospital in town. And who's the doctor in emergency? It's one of my turtles from that inaugural Year 12 class who's a doctor. And I totally forget that my mother-in-law can't breathe. I'm just all emotional seeing one of my turtles as the doctor. And I can still remember her. She took my handbag and took my mother-in-law's handbag and said, right, come with me, Anyway, and then, a few months ago, a few months ago, my youngest daughter was playing the piano and had a seizure. Well, terrified us, as you can imagine. So we take her to the hospital in town, and the doctor says, right, she needs an MRI, and I think it's called an EEG or something. And so you need to take her to Kilimanjaro. That's the big hospital at Kilimanjaro. It's about an hour and a half from here, because they have those machines. So we drive all the way to Kilimanjaro, to the hospital, and go into the MRI department. And who's one of the technicians? She comes up to me and goes, oh, Mama Gemma. And it was one of my turtles. And it was nice. Anyway, it was lovely. But talking about the broken arm, so this year, as I told you before, our first Year 12 class was 60 students. This year, we graduated over 200 from Year 12 because we have 2 secondary schools. Wow. And whilst there were 200 graduating from Year 12, they actually, as a group, beat every other Year 12 group in the history of St. Jude's academically wise. So the academic performance was off the charts. And so I said to my manager, who oversees all the heads of schools, what can we do I asked him, I said, Mr. Mcharo, what can we do? His name's Mcharo. What can we do, Mr. Mcharo, to celebrate this huge record? Because not only is it a huge group, but it's not about the students themselves and their teachers, but it's about the primary staff who put them through primary. It's the boarding staff who look after them every night. It's the cooks who feed them 3 times a day. It's all the fundraising staff who raise the money. It's the IT staff who somehow, even though we're in a third world country, keep us online so we can fundraise and we can actually communicate with the outside world. It's a huge team effort. What can we do? So he says, Gem, there's nothing more culturally appropriate than getting the 2 biggest bulls at the local Maasai market, and we have a huge barbecue and a huge because none of our students or staff are vegetarian. You're pretty hard off to find a Tanzanian who's a vegetarian. So meat is a luxury here, Graham. So we only give meat to our students a couple of times a month because it's so expensive. And so to have a huge meat allocation to each student, especially to those boy boarders, there's nothing better than food. So I said, okay. So I sent an email to our procurement department and I CC'd Mr. Mcharo, so he knew that I communicated his wishes. So I wrote to the procurement team and I said, please buy the 2 biggest bulls that you can get at the market this week and deliver it to our secondary school. We're going to surprise the school and the headmaster and the current Year 12s. So procurement do what they're told to do, and so they deliver these huge, big bulls over to the school. Now, I come from a farm, and I grew up with sheep and cattle. Now, at the time, my head of marketing was pregnant with twins, so she was not there, and my manager, who oversees the entire fundraising division, was also not there. So I'm the stand-in person who has to record this momentous record occasion. So I have the 2 bulls in the paddock. I have the headmaster and the leadership team behind the 2 bulls, and I have like 200 or so current Year 12 students who are hoping that they can break the record and maybe next year we get 3 bulls for them. I don't know. But anyway, so I'm standing by myself about probably, I don't know, 15, 20 meters from the 2 bulls, and I'm taking a picture and I'm just choreographing, saying, "Oh, Mr. Mchara, can you just move to the right, so I can see?" Well, one of the bulls looks at me, and within half a second, we locked eyes and I knew I was in trouble. So
Wow.
the bull chases me, catches. I try to run, which my brother told me I was an idiot. I was supposed to stand still and do the Spanish thing and wait for the bull to come within a meter of me, then step to the side at the last minute. But of course, I was never trained to do that. My brothers were in the bull riding business, but I wasn't, when I was younger. Anyway, so the bull catches up to me, throws me into the air. When I come down, I must use my arm to cushion the landing, and I smashed my arm. And so I'm taken to the local hospital, and the doctor says, right, straight into radiology, because even though we can't see any visual punctures from the horns, there could still be internal bleeding. And we also get to get you x-rayed because, there could be more things broken or cracked or whatever. So they roll me into radiology. And then who's the radiologist? One of my turtles, Omega. Well, I just felt like, and he looked after me like I was the Queen of Sheba. And I actually started crying. I'm going to start crying again now. Sorry.
Yeah, I love the turtle stories. Honestly, you went over there and you self-confessed were very naive and optimistic and hopeful. But I suspect that you got lots of just a few anecdotes I've heard about. It sounds like you had a couple of really amazing parents. And I was wondering about what were the leadership lessons you learnt from them.
Okay, so absolutely. I think the only reason why I have survived because I have seen countless NGOs come and go over the last 20 odd years. So I think I've been blessed because of my childhood. So growing up on the farm, we had to work on the weekends, in the evenings, and it was just the thing. I didn't know it was different. It was just that was what life was like. And so even though I was the only daughter, don't think that I was given any special privileges. So I can tell you, Graham, I can shoe a horse, shear a sheep, brand cattle, and drench sheep. I can do all of that, muster. So I was expected, and I actually wanted to keep up with the boys. My mum used to always say, "Gemma, can't you stay with me in the house, and help her cook the meals and play with my dolls and do dress ups." But I just wanted to be out with the boys on the motorbikes and the horses, that sort of thing with my dad. So, and growing up on the farm so far from town, I never ever saw a tradesman on the property. Dad did everything.
Wow.
And so we all had to sort of become tradesmen, jack of all trades. And especially, I grew up with the don't give up grit that
Mm,
farmers have.
mm,
And unbeknownst to me, I didn't realize that tenacity is the most important human trait you need to survive with building some sort of project here in Africa.
mm.
Tenacity, and of course, common sense. Anyone with with common sense is also really welcomed here and much needed. But so hard work, and then every Sunday, it didn't matter whether we were in holidays or visiting people, Mum and Dad were always able to find a church. even if even if we'd been out in the middle of the night doing something, or mustering till 2 a.m. or doing cattle work or shearing or whatever till 2 a.m. or packing wool packs, next morning Dad would get us all up and Mum would get us all up, and we'd all have to traipse to church. So I think, and even though we were farmers, Mum and Dad actually met at Melbourne Uni. So Mum was a physio and Dad was a lawyer.
Mm,
And Dad always kept his hours up by going to seminars. And we saw him giving so many farmers advice countless times. There'd be a farmer out on our veranda and Dad's giving him advice.
mm,
And we also saw a lot of people with various maybe mental health issues,
mm.
and they would be also staying at the house. We just grew up with it thinking it was normal. So I saw my parents being very compassionate helping people out, using the skills that they had to help people. They were on countless clubs and service groups and whatever. And so service, God, and hard work
Yeah.
was drilled into us, whether we wanted it or not.
But real grit counts for a lot. Funnily enough, I grew up in a country town, Taree, and my dad had a
Ah, yes.
accounting practice.
Yeah.
And
I love Taree. It's one of my favorite towns.
oh, really?
I'm actually, yes, if I was to retire, I reckon Taree would be one of my, I just think it's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a
Sorry.
lovely place there on the river.
Oh my
Yep.
gosh,
Yeah,
yes.
right beside the river. But Dad was an accountant, had an accounting practice, but he always used to like to hire people from farms, which doesn't sound relevant for accounting. But of course, they'd accounting background, but he loved that part of them because he said they just sort stuff out. Something happens, they work it out. And it's, like you said about your farm, things happen all the time. You just have to deal with it and make it happen. And it is that grit, that determination goes a very, very long way, doesn't it?
Yes, because every day curveballs happen here and you just got to work through them. And my management team know to come with me with a solution. Okay, we've got this problem, but we're proposing this. If they can't think of a solution, we'll bring a few other managers in.
Mm.
We'll try the solution. If it works, somebody has to process write it, because I'll be not very happy if someone else comes across with that issue and they come to me again. So everyone doesn't like me because I'm always into procedures and policies and everything like that. But if it doesn't work, we think of another strategy. We just keep trying ideas until a solution comes. But it's, you just got to keep knocking at it because, life is very hard here. People think working in the third world is romantic and glorious. It's not. It is hard work. You miss your family back home. It's, so you've got to really love what you do to be able to survive here. And you've got to, like I said, have that grit and don't give up attitude. And a
How
sense of humor, I think, helps as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, you got to be able to laugh,
Mm,
haven't you? You really do
mm.
when things get a bit tough. Honestly, starting from 3 students to now having the organization that you've built along with your management team is a very, very different issues and problems and challenges. How did you develop the skills to really adapt and to grow? Was that, you had obviously a great start with your parents, but have you had mentors in terms of leadership and strategy and financial management?
Yeah, so I think I've been able to adapt, and I'm still learning because I get told to pull my head in sometimes. I get wrapped over the knuckles a few times. I've got very tough board members.
Mm.
So I actually have 5 boards here,
Wow.
Graham, at the
Wow.
school, and they're no joke. So we have, because over 90% of our money comes from Australia, we
Yeah.
have a very tough Australian charity board who are very active, and they really are good at guiding
Yeah.
myself and telling me what I'm doing wrong or telling me to pull my head in sometimes.
Mm.
And I have about 5% or a bit more now, it's increasing, which is great, from the States. And we have a
Mm.
similar charity board in the States. And then the rest of the money comes from, we've now got Tanzanian sponsors, our own students. I've got one of our alumni, one of my turtles is coming in today, actually, who wants to sponsor a student. So now
Incredible.
we've got, Tanzanian donors and sponsors. We've got, I think it's about 150 turtles donate every month now to St. Jude's, even though they've only really barely finished university,
Wow.
our eldest ones. And then a bit from Canada, New Zealand, and UK. And then here at the school, like schools in Australia, each of our schools has its own board.
Yeah. Hmm.
And as you know, school boards in Australia are not easy. And so the same goes for here.
Mm.
And so I think good governance and has been critical for me over the years. It's been very difficult at times, having to go through these hard lessons, but I have an attitude where a hard lesson is actually been the best thing ever. I now believe, and I tell my management team, when you go through something tough, you actually just get through it. This time will pass. That's my favorite saying. This time will pass. just get through it, even just try and get to lunchtime and then start another goal till 5 p.m., get through it, and eventually guarantee you'll look back and say, I'm thankful for that experience because I'm a better person, or I've now got a different procedure, or, I've changed my personality a bit. And so anyway, and my leadership team, pick me up sometimes and tell me, that I'm going in the wrong direction. So that's also helpful. So definitely not myself. It's just with the help from others around me. And then, oh my gosh, my secret weapon. I haven't even told you about my secret weapon. My secret weapon is my parent leadership team here. I don't think there is another school in the world that has a parent leadership team like I have here. It's 50 strong parents. And so, Graham, where are you currently based?
In Sydney.
Okay, tell me which suburb.
Gordon on the North Shore.
Okay, so to give you an analogy, all the families who come to St. Jude's from Gordon vote for their Gordon representative, parent representative to sit on the parent leadership team. All the families from Coogee vote for their Coogee representative. All the families from Bondi, all the families from Newcastle. But because we now cover 4 regions, we've got a parent representative from Moree, we've got a parent representative from Young, we've got a parent representative from Albury, because we cover such a huge part of Tanzania now. And so to get on that parent representative, you have to be very active. And if you're not proactive for your parents in your area, you're basically kicked off. The parents here, yeah.
Voted off the island.
Exactly. So our current parent representative leaders are about 50 strong. And they give me, so when I started St. Jude's, my father, my dear dad said to me, Gem, you've got to make sure you're always getting complaints or constructive criticism about what you're doing. Because if you're not getting constructive criticism from your customers, then you've got your head in the sand, because no business can run 100% well and perfectly. So when I started St. Jude's with the whole 3 kids, I'd ask the parents, what do you think the education is like? Is there anything I can do to improve? And they'd go, oh, no, everything's great, Gemma. Oh, my gosh, it's such a good education for my child. And I thought, you're only telling me that because you're worried that if you tell me the truth, I'll pull your child's scholarship. So in my first year of operation, I asked 5 of my parents to form a parent committee. And their only job was to give me a list of things that I have to improve on once a month.
Amazing.
A list of complaints from parents. And I don't want the identification of the parent who is complaining to be put on the list. I just want the complaints. Well, boom, did it work? Very humbling. And that list comes in up to today, Graham, and up to today. And I tell you what, it is better than any audit from Price Waterhouse or Ernst & Young. It is incredible, because in the end, our parents just want the best education for their children, but they live all over the place. So they can see what's happening, they hear what's happening. And I tell you, 98% of what is written on that complaints list is true.
Wow.
So it's that. But over the last 20 odd years, that parent leadership team has grown in responsibilities. So, for example, the parent leader of Gordon has to roster a parent to be at the bus stop every Monday morning, and another parent to be on the bus stop on Monday afternoon, another parent to be at the Gordon bus stop on Tuesday morning, another one on Tuesday afternoon. And this is happening all over all these regions.
Wow.
And to make sure that our kids get on the bus and off the bus, because sometimes, it's unsafe. And because we've got some albino kids, for example, in our school. But also there's just some weirdos, as you know. And then they help with student selection, because we're a scholarship school. Everybody. So give me the name of a nice private school where you are.
One very close is Ravenswood.
At Ravenswood, that is a very nice school. So imagine if Ravenswood was free. How many people would apply to go to it? Especially if it was boarding.
Yeah.
People from Taree, people from Armidale would apply to Ravenswood if it was free. Exactly. So we have that problem. We are a private school. We do very well academically. We've got students on national sporting teams. Last year, we hosted the National Debating Public Speaking Competition, as well as the East African Speaking Public Debating Competition. So everybody wants to come. So, for example, we had 240 positions available at the beginning of secondary school this year. We had over 5,000 kids apply.
Mm.
And and so our parent leaders also help with that because we have to do poverty checking. So let's give you an example. Let's say little Graham, you want to apply for a secondary scholarship. You have to first of all come from a government primary school. If you're coming from a private primary government school, you're not eligible for a secondary scholarship. The next thing, you have to come and do a series of entrance exams, and that is based on the primary national Tanzanian curriculum. If you pass those, then we have to make sure that you are age appropriate. So you're not 21 pretending that you're only in grade 7 type age. If you are age appropriate, then we will come to your home. So I will come with a couple of staff and we will visit your home, even if you're living Mount Isa. We will come to your home and we will visit you and your family. I will, and my staff will take photographs. It's like a 4-page document of all the questions we've got to ask and the types of photos and documentary evidence we've got to take while we're visiting your home. But unbeknownst to you, one of my parent committee people are outside talking to the neighbors, talking to the local shopkeeper, talking to the kids who are carting water or pushing goats around. And anyway, so there's lots of things that my secret weapon, my parent leaders do for me at the school.
It's an amazing, the Japanese have a term for it, kaizen, continual improvement. And it is giving everyone the chance to change things and to have really, really important stakeholders like parents who have a, very, very high incentive. And I'm sure they're very constructive about it. And I would suspect when they see you respond so often, they're also fair and know that you can't change everything, can't fix everything.
Yeah, and especially what I'm so proud of is these parent committee members, the 50-odd parent reps. You would think that they are a staff member. They work so hard, completely voluntarily, completely voluntary. They do all of these extra tasks. They've got about 10 tasks, but I'd have to spend 2 weeks explaining to you what they do. And I know we don't have 2 weeks.
How you have lots on the go, and I know you're married, you've got 4 kids. How do you recharge your batteries? How do you keep your own fuel in your own tank?
So I'm a homebody. So last night is a very typical night. So I get home, kiss my husband, hi, I'm back, and I go straight to the kitchen and I start cooking dinner. So cooking, I love cooking. And I think that comes from my own mother. Not that when I was young, I wanted to be like my mum, like all young women. But my mum was a real homemaker. So she would, sew our clothes. She would knit sweaters for us. We'd always have like a soup and then a main meal and some sort of dessert, jelly or something that she'd made for us. If we were sick, we'd always get mashed banana or ice cream or jelly or something. And the ultimate homemaker. And so for me, I, subconsciously, or I don't know, I just figure that's what a good mum has to be. So I love cooking and I love gardening. So I'm an avid gardener and I take it out on the dirt, I think, and the flowers maybe.
I'm a keen gardener as well, and there's something about being outside and seeing
Mm,
things grow and pruning
exactly.
it and seeing it come back stronger than it was before. It's
Mm,
very, very rewarding, very fulfilling.
mm, mm.
Is there a
And
book? I was going to
and
say,
I like walking too, Graham. Sorry.
me
So in
too.
the mornings I walk. So we've got 3 labs, and
You're one.
yeah. And so I walk for a couple of hours in the morning, and that just, I know, empties my head. And I listen to podcasts, actually. I'm a huge podcast fan, um,
Fantastic.
mainly true crime, just to be upfront.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
by the time I've got down to the next village, I've already, that's who has murdered so and so. Anyway. Mm.
Is there a book or a movie or a piece of art which has really had a big impact on you?
Oh, not really. Well, maybe The Tipping Point was a book that
Mm,
I got out
mm.
of, a lot out of, especially around that continuous improvement model. The
Yeah.
Tipping Point, that would be one.
And I would
Uh,
say the
yeah.
turtle, your turtles had a big impact on you in terms of un
Yes, yes.
understanding the life cycle that goes on. And I really love that perspective. You got to be patient, to see the fruits because
Mm,
they do go away. They're very busy, but it's nice when they start coming back and to have 100 students, donating regularly back to the school must be very, very rewarding.
Yes, and it's just the start because, the doctors, for example, from our first inaugural graduating class have only been in hospitals for 2 years.
Yeah.
Imagine what's the impact going to be in 10 years when they
Yeah.
start becoming leaders in their hospitals, or in 20 years. And so if we've got 150 kids already donating, and like I said, we've got alumni who are now sponsoring little ones, sadly, that 92% that Australia is giving, I think will move towards Tanzania is giving, a much larger proportion. But I'm excited to see what happens. And yeah, I just find we were in a meeting yesterday, and the boss of my schools, Mr. Mchara, the one who told me to buy the bulls. By the way, I told him next year, if we break another record, I'm just buying hundreds and hundreds of chickens. But anyway, it was a joke. But yesterday, Mr. Nshara said he was at a restaurant in town. It's like a club where you can have barbecue meat and, nice meals. It's like a nice pub in Armidale where you can take the family, but you get good meals, but you can also buy a beer, that sort of place.
Mm,
Well,
mm.
a couple of our turtles walk up behind him and pay his entire meal and all of his drinks.
Wow.
Isn't that beautiful?
It is. It's really,
Mm,
really stunning.
yeah.
So, how do people go about sponsoring a child or making a donation to St. Jude's School?
So I called the school, by the way, St. Jude's, because St. Jude is the patron saint of the hopeless cases. So when I was trying to start a school with $10, having never built anything in my life, other than, a guinea pig's cage, actually, when I was in year 9, that was the only thing I never built. So I thought, well, calling the school after the saint of the hopeless, that's why I called the school St. Jude. And so if someone wants to help, they just have to type St. Jude into Google, St. Jude School, Tanzania, and they'll find our website.
Yeah,
But it's actually schoolofstjude.org is our website. And up there, it's how to support us. And it says sponsor a student or make a donation. And
fabulous.
so we try and make it very easy because this year, for example, we enrolled around 250 students between primary and secondary. And so we need those kids to have sponsors of their scholarships.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd love someone to come and join the journey, and then it would be wonderful. This year we have around 200 students again graduating year 12, and we're expecting around 60 or 70 sponsors to make the journey to Tanzania for
Oh,
that
that's fabulous.
graduation.
That's fabulous.
It's always wonderful to
Yeah.
see. Yeah, we have a huge visitor program. We actually have around 70 rooms for visiting sponsors and donors,
Amazing.
or Rotarians. So
Amazing.
if you're a Rotarian, you
Yeah.
get a room for free,
Excellent.
um,
Excellent.
like a sponsor and a donor. So we have
Excellent.
a whole visitor department that looks after our visitors that stay on campus, because we are very transparent and we want people to see with their own eyes how we're using the donations and sponsorships here on the ground. Plus,
Fabulous.
they can go on safari. We just happen to be in the best safari part of the entire world. So you've got the Serengeti, elephants, lots of lions and leopards and cheetahs, all within a few
Amazing.
hours' drive.
Amazing.
Mm.
I always finish by asking the same question, and that is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self to, I guess, maybe enjoy the ride a bit more?
Definitely, I would have married my husband earlier. That means I wish I had married him earlier. Could have had a few more children by then. But we've got 4, but I would have loved to have had more children. And my other advice is open boarding earlier. I didn't, when I opened St. Jude's, it was a day school. But parents were putting a lot of pressure on me, my parent committee, putting a lot of pressure on me to open boarding, because a lot of our kids live in not so safe environments. But at the time I was thinking, oh my gosh, boarding is so 24/7. I was a boarder myself, so I was very aware of the work involved. So I said,
Mm.
no, no, no. But then after about 7 years, we opened boarding. In hindsight, I wish we'd opened boarding when that parent committee, who in the end know best, told me to open boarding. That's really my only other big regret in
Yeah.
regards to the school.
Yeah. Well, that's not too much to regret. You've, continue to build and grow and evolve. And yeah, really fantastic. Thank you so much for being part of the Caring CEO, Gemma. And I really wish yourself, your family, and your school all the best in 2025 and onwards from there.
Thanks, Graham. But when am I going to have the pleasure of hosting you and your family?
Well, I must say it's very, very tempting. Very, very
So if
tempting.
you're in Gordon, just takes you maybe an hour to get to the airport, and then you fly from Sydney to Doha, and Doha straight into Kilimanjaro, and I'll come and pick you up myself.
Amazing,
So
amazing.
two
Well,
two flights.
I may well take you up on that. My wife and I love to walk as well. We do lots of walks around Australia
Ah,
and around the world, and yeah, and we went to South Africa. I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, and went on safaris
okay.
there. But as
Yeah.
I hear, Tanzania is much better. So
Much, much better. Absolutely much better. Mm.
thanks so much, Jim. I love it to be with you.
Good on you, Graham. Thanks for having me. I
No
enjoyed it.
problem.
See ya.
See ya.